Dawn broke like a wound over the desert. The air hung still, thick with dust and diesel, carrying the smell of old sweat and silence. A half-circle of soldiers stood around the supply truck, faces pale beneath their helmets, boots sinking into sand that had seen too many secrets. The rope swayed in the faint wind, slow, deliberate, alive. At the center stood a woman in torn fatigues, wrists bound, bruised but unbroken. Her eyes were steady, tracing the horizon as if waiting for it to blink first. No one spoke. Even the flag above the base seemed to hesitate, caught between salute and surrender. The officer in charge cleared his throat, reading words that no one believed. By order of command, his voice cracked on the lie. Someone coughed. Someone else looked away. The rope creaked again. She didn't flinch. She only whispered something the guards couldn't hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe a promise. And before I show you what led to that order, take a second, tap subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. This story reaches farther than any radio signal ever could, and I'd like to know how far her name will travel. Engines growled somewhere beyond the dunes. A shimmer on the horizon thickened into movement. A convoy, small, fast, kicking up a column of dust that clawed at the morning light. The executioner froze mid-step. Orders crackled through his headset, sharp and nervous. No one moved. The wind carried a low hum, and for the first time, the soldiers realized they might not be the highest authority here. She lifted her chin, eyes narrowing at the oncoming haze. The rope stopped swaying. The air shifted, heavy, electric, expectant. They thought they were about to end her story. Instead, they were about to start a war inside their own ranks. 72 hours before the rope, the air in the interrogation room felt colder than the desert at night. Fluorescent lights hummed above a steel table scratched by 100 previous confessions. Lieutenant Adrian Cole sat straight, wrists resting on the metal, her face shadowed by exhaustion and restraint. Across from her, 3 officers leaned in like vultures circling certainty. They weren't looking for truth. They were confirming a sentence already written. "Did you transmit classified coordinates to local channels?" one asked. His tone carried the weight of paperwork, not evidence. Cole said nothing. The silence stretched so long that it became its own accusation. A second officer slid a folder across the table. Photographs, timestamps, fragments of messages stripped of context. "We have proof you compromised operational security." She studied the papers as if they belonged to another life, another war. She knew what they'd done. Cut pieces from her report until the story bent toward guilt. 3 days earlier she had found them. Contractors in unmarked vehicles moving crates marked medical into civilian zones. She'd recorded it, logged it, reported it up the chain. The next morning her access codes were revoked. Her name vanished from duty rosters. By sunset, she was labeled an internal threat. The speed of it all felt mechanical, rehearsed, as if the system had protocols for swallowing its own. One of the interrogators leaned closer. "Silence can be taken as confirmation, Lieutenant." She met his eyes. "Then take it however you need to." The room stilled. There was no defiance in her voice, only fatigue, the kind that comes from realizing the badge on your chest protects the guilty before the innocent. Outside, a sandstorm pressed against the glass, a muffled roar like distant engines. Someone mentioned that the colonel was still off base, unreachable. For a brief moment, she imagined he might return before the storm passed. Then the door opened, and a guard motioned her out. The report would say she refused to cooperate. The truth was simpler. There was no one left she trusted to listen. Colonel David Drake returned to the forward base the way storms arrive, quiet, steady, inevitable. The desert greeted him with a thin layer of dust that clung to his boots and mirrored the wear in his eyes. He'd been in the field for nearly 2 months, leading recovery ops on the border, far from politics and paperwork. The message that pulled him back had been vague. Internal matter, resolved. But Drake had learned that when bureaucrats used the word resolved, someone was usually buried beneath it. He stepped into the operations center, the hum of air conditioning barely cutting through the heat. Conversations dimmed at his arrival. Even in silence, his presence rearranged the room. He didn't shout, didn't demand salute. He carried authority the way others carried weapons. "Where's Lieutenant Cole?" he asked. The young adjutant hesitated before answering, eyes flicking toward the senior officers huddled by the monitors. "Sir," the investigation concluded. "Sentence carried out this morning." Drake's hand froze halfway to removing his gloves. Sentence. The word tasted wrong. He looked from face to face, waiting for someone to correct it, to tell him he'd misheard. No one did. Instead, a captain cleared his throat. It was expedited under Joint Directive 12, sir. Treason. He set his gloves down carefully, as if handling explosives. Expedited? Who signed it? Silence. Paperwork shuffled. A printer clicked somewhere in the corner, spitting out more lies. The colonel read the room. The stiffness, the deflected gazes, the too clean desk where the truth should have been. Something here stank worse than the desert rot. He turned toward the window. Outside, the horizon shimmered with heat, and far in the distance, he saw the dust trail of a convoy returning from a forgotten corner of the base. He knew instinctively that whatever had happened, it hadn't been justice. It had been housekeeping. His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for himself. Someone wants her gone before sunrise. The sun had climbed high enough to turn the outpost into a furnace. Heat shimmered off metal, bending light, bending time. The rope now hung steady, its fibers stiff with dust and oil. The paperwork was signed, ink still drying in the open air. The officer overseeing the execution wiped his brow and nodded to the young private assigned to tie the final knot. The boy's hands trembled. He'd never done this before. He kept glancing at the woman standing beneath the rope, her face calm in a way that didn't make sense. She wasn't pleading, wasn't protesting, just waiting. Overhead, the loudspeaker cracked to life, the voice cold and detached. Proceeding with Order 715. Countdown begins at 0700 hours. The words echoed through the yard like a sentence already carved into stone. The soldiers shifted uneasily, each pretending not to hear the others breathe. Miles away, Drake's vehicle tore across the desert, kicking up waves of dust that trailed behind him like ghosts. The radio hissed with chatter, half-coded transmissions, fragments of reports. Execution confirmed. Order verified by command. His jaw tightened. He accelerated, the engine groaning under the weight of his intent. Every mile narrowed the distance between justice and burial. Back at the compound, the private looped the rope, knuckles white. He hesitated, the knot unfinished. The officer barked, "Do it," but the boy's voice cracked when he answered, "Sir, she's one of us." The reply came sharp, final, "Not anymore." The wind picked up, sweeping sand through the compound. It stung eyes, blurred edges, turned the world sepia and unreal. Cole closed her eyes briefly, exhaling. Somewhere in the hum of the loudspeaker, a countdown began, 10, 9, 8, each number striking like a hammer. Drake could see the watchtower now, sunlight flashing off metal. He pressed harder on the accelerator. His radio screamed with static and voices shouting over each other. 5, 4, 3. The convoy burst over the ridge, engines roaring. The private's hand froze on the rope. Cole opened her eyes, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. 2, 1. The convoy didn't slow. It tore through the compound gates like a desert storm unleashed. Dust exploded across the yard, swallowing soldiers, rope, and fear in one violent breath. The vehicles ground to a halt, engines still growling as if reluctant to obey. Out of the haze stepped Colonel David Drake, boots heavy, uniform streaked with sand. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence alone drew every set of eyes toward him. "Stand down." The words were steady, measured, each syllable cutting through the chaos sharper than any weapon. No one moved. The officer nearest the rope tried to form an excuse, but his throat locked. Drake's gaze swept the line of soldiers, pausing only when it reached the condemned woman still standing beneath the hanging noose. Her wrists were bound, her posture unbroken. He moved forward, unholstering his sidearm, not to aim, but to act. One flick of the wrist, one clean strike, and the rope snapped apart. The sound was small, but it echoed like thunder. Cole fell to her knees, gasping for air that tasted like life, while the rope, frayed and useless, coiled in the dust beside her boots. Silence followed, the kind that demanded reckoning. The soldiers didn't cheer. They didn't breathe. They just watched as Drake holstered his weapon and turned toward the men responsible. "Who authorized this execution?" His voice was lower now, calm as a storm before it breaks. No one answered. He took a step closer, eyes narrowing, the dust swirling around him like smoke rising from judgment. "I'll ask once." Still nothing. Just the rustle of papers, the squeak of boots trying to edge away. Then, from the corner, a voice. Nervous, too quick. It was approved by contract command, sir, outside the chain of. Drake's head turned, slow and deliberate, locking onto the speaker. A contractor liaison in a too-clean uniform. Their eyes met, and the truth didn't need words. Everyone saw it. Everyone felt it. The corruption wasn't buried deep. It was sitting right there in plain sight, hiding behind insignia and protocol. Drake stepped closer, his tone ice cold. Then tell your contractor their war just changed hands. And as he lifted Cole back to her feet, the rope still swaying behind them, every man on that field knew something irreversible had happened. The system had cracked, and justice had found its opening. Night had fallen by the time Drake finally sat alone in his quarters, the chaos of the day replaced by the hum of fluorescent light and the faint tick of a wall clock. The file in front of him was sealed, stamped classified, level 6, but the seal didn't stop him. He broke it open and began to read. Cole's field logs weren't accusations, they were evidence. Every entry was precise, clinical, unflinching. Dates, coordinates, signatures. She had tracked a contractor network falsifying mission reports, redirecting supplies, and covering up civilian casualties under the label of enemy contact. Her refusal to approve those lies was what branded her a traitor. Drake leaned back, jaw set. It wasn't treason, it was conscience. And conscience had become the most dangerous trait in uniform. He could almost hear her silence from that interrogation room. Not fear, but defiance measured in breaths. That same silence now echoed through the pages. He didn't call a meeting or make a speech. Instead, he uploaded the logs through official intelligence channels, copying every oversight division and security office with clearance high enough to matter. It wasn't reckless, it was deliberate. He wanted the truth to surface within the system that tried to bury it. And when it did, the tremor hit every layer of command. By morning, messages were flying between departments. Orders were suspended. The inquiry had begun. When Cole was called in days later, she didn't look vindicated. She looked tired, but lighter. Her record was cleared. Drake met her outside the tribunal tent, the desert wind tugging at both their uniforms. For a moment, neither spoke. There was no celebration, no handshake, just the quiet understanding shared between people who had both crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He broke the silence first. They're reassigning us. Different commands. She nodded. For security reasons, she said, almost smiling. Drake studied her face, still bruised, still unbroken. Sometimes following the rules, he said, is the most dangerous thing you can do. And as she walked away toward a new post, the same wind that once carried the sound of the rope now carried something else. The weight of truth, unburied at last. They said the desert forgets everything. The wind wipes away tracks, the sun burns out memory, and silence buries the rest. But not that day. The rope is gone now, the outpost quiet, its gates half open as if waiting for someone who will never return. The men who stood there still remember how the dust rose before dawn, how the convoy appeared like a mirage that refused to fade. They remember the moment justice arrived, not with noise, not with rage, but with calm certainty, like truth itself taking human form. The world moved on, files were sealed, and orders were rewritten. But some stories don't fade, they echo. They ask questions that uniforms can't answer, that ranks can't silence. So tell me, if you were there, in that heat, in that silence, would you have obeyed the order or cut the rope yourself? If stories like this remind you that courage still has a cost, hit subscribe. It tells me you're one of us. And before you go, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, because every name, every place, every story shared here is another cut in the rope that keeps truth bound.